The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. It's time for the Guillotine Grapevine, a podcast for the land of 10,000 wrestlers. 10,000 wrestlers. Now, here's your host, award-winning wrestling broadcast journalist, Jason Bryant.
And welcome back, Minnesota wrestling fans. Another episode of the Guillotine Grapevine, the wrestling podcast for the land of 10,000 wrestlers. My name is Jason Bryant, and off-season is here, and that means all sorts of freestyle and Greco, but we're actually sticking with the college theme today. Our guest today, a name that's been the voice of wrestling in Minnesota, or a voice in wrestling in Minnesota, and a voice nationally, and you'll get a chance to know him a little bit better. John Peterson, famous name, but different guy. John Peterson, the National Wrestling Media Association's Broadcaster of the Year and voice of St. Cloud State Husky Wrestling. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's just get to brass tacks. You've got this award now, and I'm for full disclosure, I'm the president of the National Wrestling Media Association, and we said, you know what, this guy in Division II has done a really good job the last couple of years in starting out and really creating a voice for St. Cloud State Wrestling. The rise of the program, you have been basically the soundtrack for these national championships and such, and I just take us back to square one with St. Cloud State before we get to square one in your career. How did this opportunity develop with St. Cloud State, and you find yourself being the voice for the top program in Division II wrestling?
Well, it started way back in 2012. I can't believe I've been here for 6 years already. It's been quite the ride, and started back in August of 2012 when I came here to obtain a master's in mass communications with an emphasis in strategic media communications. And when I got here, I knew that I still wanted to stay with the sport of wrestling. It's been in my blood, my whole life, and I wanted to be a part of St. Cloud State University Wrestling. So I called up Steve Costanza one of the first nights I actually settled into my apartment, and he got back to me that night. And I told him that I wanted to broadcast and be a part of the family, and he says, I will have it no other way. You will travel with us. You'll be able to do social media, because I told him I had experience in that. And we'd love for you to travel everywhere, be a broadcaster, and be a part of the Husky family. So it started right off the bat, and it's been a joy ever since.
Yeah, what's also interesting is for those here in the great state of Minnesota know how much we love our hockey here as well. And that's a pretty good program there at St. Cloud State with the whole hockey thing at the Division I level. And it seems to be the marquee sport. And, of course, there's the radio station on campus. So when you get the idea to do this, what about fighting for airtime, fighting for streaming space? What was it like to try to present the opportunity? Hey, let's bring wrestling to the different avenues that KVSC brings.
They all stepped off to the side, but believe it or not, because when I went down to the basement of Stewart Hall on the campus of St. Cloud State University, when I went to KVSC, I told them right off the bat, I want to broadcast wrestling. They all looked at each other, and they're like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, no, I'm not. This has a very good program here at St. Cloud State, and the wrestling team has been very good. I want to broadcast this sport. They all stepped off to the side because all of them stepped off the side because they all wanted to broadcast hockey. There was a waiting line, and still is a waiting line to broadcast hockey for KVSC. That's their main sport. So I had wrestling all to myself, and with hockey having a safe space right on the airwaves of KVSC 88.1 FM, I had the sports stream. I was on KVSC radio a little bit here and there, but the majority of the time, my home was on the KVSC sports stream. So I had the sports stream myself. There was dead air on the sports stream the majority of the time when they wouldn't do sports until I got there. And I kept that sports stream alive with knowing that I want to broadcast as much wrestling as possible. So I gave a new name to the sports stream, and that's been my home since 2012.
Yeah, and when you get there, of course, you're a graduate of Bemidji State, but when you get there, was it just wrestling you were broadcasting, or did you jump around to other sports as needed?
I did jump around the sports as needed right off the bat. I mean, I was I was a graduate student, but I was a sporty, what they call the people down at KVSC. I was a sporty, so I did football. I did a couple games for football. When it wasn't wrestling season, volleyball was my main sport. I did concentrate on volleyball quite a bit. So I was on the broadcast for volleyball. And then other than that, I mean, usually public address announcing took up my other time. So if I wasn't at KVSC, when I was volunteering for sports, it was public. So the main sports I stuck with were football, volleyball, and wrestling.
Now, I can understand the strain of being a public address announcer. I've been doing it for 22 years. But one thing that gets me, though, is when I've helped out with a class here and there, and that was actually even before I even worked and lived in Minnesota, is some of these Minnesota names are as complicated as some of these Mongolian names that I had at the World Cup or the Nigerians at the Commonwealth Games. I mean, as a native Minnesotan, is that something that comes second nature, or do you even have to go like, okay, Van Spronsenberg? And I mean, how do you go about approaching the players? Be like, hey, how do you say your name?
I make it a habit before every game to go up to the coach, introduce myself, and say, let's go through these names here. And as a matter of fact, from like some names, Steve, it's actually quite humorous sometimes when Steve Costanzo says some of these names. We had a wrestler named Kurt Salmon from Dassel, Cokato. He called him Salmon. And how many times we tried to correct him? It's Kurt Salmon, and even Kurt, as nice as a guy he is, just smiles. So we just call him Slammin' Salmon because Steve just called him Salmon, and for some reason he never got the correct name. But as for all the other sports, yeah, I make it a habit to make sure that I do know how to pronounce the name, and sometimes I actually know how to pronounce it better than their coaches because they have no idea. But being in Minnesota sports for so long, you and I both know. There's brothers, there's sisters. So when I grew up, I knew who Sapertovich was. I knew who Phil and Kenny Mekadick were. So the household names in Minnesota wrestling, what have you, and along with other sports, I've been around long enough that I see their younger brothers and sisters come up to the sport, and I said, okay, I know who you are.
You know what really gets me, and this also deals with the Swedes, so I'm kind of giving it away, the freaking umlauts, man. I mean, that's what everything we know about broadcasting, an umlaut will throw you for a loop every time. Now, I want to go back in time a little bit before you even got to St. Cloud, before you even went to college. You're from, what is that, Fertile, Minnesota? That is out there, dude. Where do you discover wrestling out there? I mean, that's between Crookston and Fargo, essentially, way out there.
Yeah, it's actually, it's up by Crookston. It's about 40 minutes southeast of Crookston, an hour southeast of Grand Forks, and we're probably 3 hours and some change away from the good old Canadian border. So we are up there, but anyone listening to this podcast right now would know Fertile Beltrami by the 70s and 80s in wrestling. He had a powerhouse back in the 70s and 80s led by Marv Nelson and Bob Thorson. So 70s and 80s, our wrestling program was pretty good. But as I got into high school, I have two older brothers that are twins. So I kept track of every town in Minnesota by their wrestling team from whom my brothers went against. I graduated in 07. They graduated in 06. So we were pretty good in Section 8A, but everyone knows who was in Section 8A was the Frazee Hornets and the Badger Greenbush Middle River Gators. So we never came out of the section. But if you paid attention to Section 8A, that's where Fertile Beltrami was.
Yeah, so how did you go about discovering wrestling? I mean, you said you got the twins that wrestle, but is that something that was in your family? And then, I mean, why did you love the sport and want to say, I want to do something beyond college and come back to it?
It was absolutely my brothers. It was. I kept track of everybody they went against. I wrestled when I was in junior high. I had a football accident my 7th grade year. Found out that it's something I really don't want to pressure on. I sing myself. I'm a singer, so I can sing in front of 20,000 people. But for me, nervous in front of a spotlight of 30 people in a small town of Fertile, that's a different type of nervousness. But I love that nervousness when I was off the mat, videotaping my brothers. So when I knew that when they graduated, I did not want to get away from the sport. They went away from the sport. They're married. They coached a little bit out in North Dakota, but since then they've gotten away from the sport. But I've stayed with it because of how much fun I had watching my brothers, watching Fertile, and that's something that I wanted to stay with for the rest of my life.
Well, it's interesting because you had a detour there to Bemidji State, which doesn't have a wrestling program. So while you were an undergrad there, how did you stay involved with the sport of wrestling while going to a Division II school that doesn't have wrestling?
The first 2 or 3 years, I tried to stay with high school as much as possible, but of course, academics got in the way. So that was kind of that was kind of a period where I was out of the loop with a lot of the household names of Minnesota wrestling. I kept track of the state tournament, but not year round like I used to. So how I got back into the sport is my senior year, where I had an internship at RP Broadcasting in Bemidji. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. So the boss at the radio station found out I wanted to get involved in sports, and he said right away, "I'm sure you want to do basketball and football and hockey." And I looked at him and I said, "No, as a matter of fact, I want to do wrestling." The same thing that the people at KDSC did. They looked at each other and like, "Are you serious? You want to broadcast wrestling?" I said, "Yes." Bemidji High School is a very good program. I mean, as much as they were 8 AAA, all the teams that made it to the state tournaments in Class AAA, the majority of all of them were in the cities except Bemidji. In the early 2000s, they had a great program. Then Rob Strand did a great job there, and now Rance Barr's there, and Rance took me underneath his wing, and made those first 2 years of my broadcasting career just a blast. It was a blast. Rance does a great job there, and that's how I got back into it.
Is it a hard sell to try to sell a radio outlet that, hey, I want to do high school wrestling on the radio?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up, because it was interesting on how the general manager actually went back in the archives and found that the winningest high school team in Bemidji was the wrestling team. So he put that in the sales package. As much as hockey is a big name in Bemidji, also the wrestling team had a storied career of being a very good sport. So we put that in the sales package. And as a matter of fact, we ended the regular season with 8 sponsors. And that year we had we made a run to the state tournament as a team, and we doubled our sponsors to 16. So by the state tournament, we were from 8 to 16. And it was a really good showing to see how much wrestling can become a family. I mean, the wrestling club was a really big sponsor for the program itself. But as we got to the state tournament, everyone tuned in, and we doubled our sponsors.
So that opportunity, you showing up at the state tournament, I would have to say that you think that opened the door for Prep 45 experience and working with the Clash with streaming some on Flow Wrestling even back in 2015. I mean, Prep 45. I mean, the state tournaments, they excel. I mean, provided I get a credential, which doesn't happen anymore, but provided that you had that experience at state tournament, how many doors do you think that opened for you for the MSHSL events?
Oh, man, I remember the first day I was sitting there, and I almost came to tears, honestly, thinking I'm an intern right now, and I'm on media row of the Minnesota State High School League wrestling tournament. It was something huge to me, and I knew from there I was where I felt comfortable. When I was sitting in a media row at the state tournament, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. If it's not going to be full-time, this is something that I know I have a niche with. So, yeah, it did. It most definitely opened up doors with the opportunity, because it gave myself confidence. It gave me confidence knowing that if I can broadcast at the state tournament, I most definitely can broadcast at a national level someday.
Yeah, because the quality of wrestling in this state, which, again, I know people in Minnesota know this, and I'm trying to actually get that point across. And actually, this is one of the best high school wrestling states in the country. And even going back to the days where I did the national high school rankings with Intermat back in 2005 to 2008, I go make sure I look at the Minnesota State tournament. It's like, okay, where are those undefeated seniors that are just going to chew it up this summer in Fargo? Because you've got people that'll break through with a state title, and then, okay, guess what? This guy from, you mentioned Frazee and places out west. Like, yep, that guy's going to place in Fargo. Watch this. And sure enough, it's almost like clairvoyance to say, yeah, we called this one early because he won a Minnesota State title, and that is not an easy thing to do. Now, moving back to the St. Cloud situation, I guess compare the experiences because hockey is the big sport at both St. Cloud and at Bemidji. So I guess maybe compare the landscape of college athletics at both places, and what was good about Bemidji that you took with you to St. Cloud State.
I mean, the experience of getting to know radio. It was the experience of getting that hands-on experience of knowing how to run a radio broadcast. I didn't do my internship on campus where the radio station at BSU reached probably 700 watts. It didn't go anywhere. But I did my wrestling broadcast on a 50,000 watt station, and then did updates on a 100,000 watt station. So having that experience, and then the next year going on to a radio station in Park Rapids, carrying that program of Bemidji wrestling onto that next year, it all gained my experience going into St. Cloud State and working at a student radio station again. So the experience that I had in radio at BSU carried over to St. Cloud State, even though it wasn't my main focus. I actually have done some high school wrestling here for one of the local radio stations here in St. Cloud, and they knew I knew how to run a broadcast. So all that experience I learned at BSU came into play here at St. Cloud State and in an area radio station in St. Cloud. So it was just all about knowing how to run a broadcast and being comfortable with a mic in front of me.
What have been your impressions of the rise of the program? Because before St. Cloud, before Coach Costanzo came to St. Cloud, he'd had a championship team at Dana College. Of course, that school is now closed because of the financial situations we have in this country with educational institutions. But he immediately became a national player, and it wasn't a national championship right away, but all of a sudden you saw the rise of the program. When you've got a program that's rekindling its wrestling heritage and you get to be the broadcaster for that, what are the difficulties in getting people to actually try to listen and be like, hey, we're not very good right now, but we're going to be good soon? I mean, how do you get people to one, listen to the radio, or even, hey, pull up this stream and listen, with everything being so visually oriented now with video? Oh, video. I mean, how do you convince people, listen to the stream of a team that's not good yet, but we will be good?
Well, it's a different story from high school to college. In high school, the grandparents and the parents want to listen in only for the sole factor of hearing their kid's name. So it was a different outlook on it when I was doing a couple years of high school and going into college. And that caught my eye right away when I came to St. Cloud State and saw that Steve was 21-0 and second in the national tournament the previous year I got there. So I knew I was coming into a program where Steve has turned things around. When I was at Bemidji State, I had a relationship with, at the time, the athletic director, Rick Gobe. He was also a coach for St. Cloud State Wrestling. And when I look back, he struggled, didn't do the greatest job, but he was a great wrestler himself. So when I saw how good the program at St. Cloud State got, how they turned it around, I knew that this was going to be something that probably people wanted to listen to. At Bemidji, when I did that broadcast, the wrestling club stepped up, and a lot of sponsors that had parents within that wrestling club sponsored. When I came to St. Cloud State, we didn't have that obstacle to go over because KBSC is just volunteer. So we didn't have to find sponsors. There's airtime. There's a sports stream. Go have fun. So, I mean, we didn't have to worry about sponsors. But the alumni at St. Cloud State really jumped in and helped out. And I had listeners all the way over from California, Illinois. I mean, Steve, he recruits a lot over there, and he recruits not just in the state, but nationwide. So, I mean, the parents wanting to listen to their kids that are wrestling out in Minot or wrestling out in Mary or even at home, every duel means just as much as the other one, even if we're at home or away. So people listening all the way over from Texas knowing that, hey, my kid decided to go to a school 500 miles away from me, but I still get to listen to him. So that's the type of audience that I knew that really wanted to listen in, because knowing that they had a way to.
Okay, so just want to make sure my timeline's wrong. Right, it looks like I had gotten my dates slightly off kilter. So they were already starting to build when you arrived. They were already having success. It was so you came in right after Costanza started winning big time, right?
Yes, yeah. I actually came in. I came in 2012, and they already were second twice. They were already second twice. And then when I came in that third year, we were second in Alabama. Then we were sixth. Then won our 2 titles. Then got second, and then first. So I came in right when Steve has established a great program thus far.
Okay, gotcha. Just so I want to put it. So you didn't have to sell a "we're not that good" program. Yeah, Steve had already basically put the undefeated program out there, and actually during that course set a new Division II record for dual meet wins in a row. I believe that was that was the 2012-13 season, if I'm not mistaken, because I believe I just moved back to this great state of Minnesota. Now, looking at the opportunities that have presented themselves for you and your career, recently the last 3 years, you've been part of the Division I Mad Side crew, but even before that, the opportunities to call the action from a St. Cloud perspective at the Division II National Championships. How did that open doors for you to do things with track wrestling and NCAA.com?
Well, it's all about knowing. It's all about knowing parents, and it's all about getting to know the wrestlers. And that was one of the main goals that I had, is getting to know the family, getting to know the people that actually tuned in. And I'll never forget one of the first conversations I had with one of the parents that actually knew Shane Sparks from the Big Ten Network, and she was family friends with him, and I got to know Shane early in my career here at St. Cloud State. And I was able to get a good relationship with Shane. He was able to hear me at the Division II National Championships in St. Louis when we won our first national title. He told me about the ESPN broadcast. He said, "We got to get you in there." And I said, "That's very nice of you. I find this to be a long shot, but that's very nice of you." And then when he actually heard me, he says, "I'm not kidding. We got to get you into this broadcast." So, long story short, as you probably know the story, that announcers got switched around, and then there was an open spot. And Shane talked to Jim Knapp of Live Sports Radio, and he said, when Shane says there's a guy that he wants to have broadcast, I trust him. So I got in from Shane, and I got in from the St. Cloud State community who knew names, and that's how I got Division I. I could not go with St. Cloud State to the Warrensburg duels in January of one year, and that's where I looked into broadcast for Flow at the Clash. So switching gears to the Clash, I contacted Lance Hughes and told him that I really wanted the opportunity of doing that. So I drove down to Rochester, and he says, "Yeah, absolutely, we would love to have you." So I got to do the Clash that one year because of what I was doing at that time with my I was outside of school, so I was at a full-time job. I was not able to go with St. Cloud State to the Warrensburg duels in Missouri. So instead, I went to the Clash and got that opportunity to broadcast for Flow.
Now, when we look at coming from fertile Minnesota to, I don't know, places like St. Louis, Cleveland, Madison Square Garden. I mean, did you think that asking to broadcast wrestling at St. Cloud State would have opened these type of opportunities? Granted, yeah, we're a niche sport. We're broadcasters who like wrestling. We stay with wrestling because we love wrestling, but we've had the opportunity to be a couple cool places over the past, at least in my career, various countries. But coming from a tiny town of Western Minnesota to the biggest stage in wrestling, I mean, what's that experience really been like for you?
It's been amazing. It really has. I mean, before I started broadcasting St. Cloud State wrestling, I think the total amount of states I've been in were probably 3 or 4 states. Since then, I've been to 11 different states at least. So I've been to a bunch of states. The first year, we got to go to Phoenix, Arizona for the Grand Canyon duels. And we got to go to Birmingham, Alabama for the Nationals that year. Then the next year, we got to go to Edmond, Oklahoma There's a lot of places where Fort Wayne, Indiana for national duels, Springfield, Illinois, just to name a few. Really got to go to a lot of states, just see something new and just get in that atmosphere of traveling with the team. There were a couple of years where every weekend in January, I was in a different state. I mean, I didn't mind it at all. When the season was over, it was good to have a couple-week break, and I wanted to go right back at it. I wanted to go right back to every state and travel and be in a different venue every weekend. It's been a complete joy, and I just can't wait to go to new places in the next couple of years.
Now, as far as the Media Association Award, and this is something I kind of teased at you as we announced it just about a week or two ago. We're looking at presenting this at the banquet here coming up. By the time you listen to this banquet may or may not have happened as we record on April 19th, 2018. So one, congratulations on the award, and you joined Tom Nelson, the sports information director there at St. Cloud State, as a recipient of a National Wrestling Media Association award. He had picked up the Small College SID of the Year award a couple years ago, and what's it kind of say to everything that you've looked at and be like, okay, you've talked about your experience, but what's it mean to pick up an award and to be recognized by the Media Association?
One of the big things I look at right away is who has gotten this award in the past. That is the main one. Before we had this interview, I listened to your interview with Jason Knapp last year, and I've listened to some other interviews too. And then when I watch on TV, and I watch Eric Olenowski, I watch Shane Sparks, I watch, and I even watch yourself. I mean, ones that have had these award that has had this award in the past. It's one of the most humbling awards I've ever gotten in my life. Knowing that the people that I watch, that I listen to get better at my own broadcast, I'm now on the same list as these people that I had looked up to. I've asked many questions to, like, how do you do this? What do you do in this situation? Or just to be friends with. I mean, it's some of the best times I've had at the Division I championships is beforehand, just chatting with Ben Hupke, chatting with Shane Sparks, Eric Olenowski, and just meeting all these big time names in wrestling. I watched you on TV, and now I actually get to meet you. And now I'm in the same sentence as you for the National Wrestling Media Association Broadcaster of the Year. It is mind-boggling, to say the least.
So where do you go from here? I mean, you're still a young guy. You've got a lot of years ahead of you in terms of a broadcast career. Have you done any of that singing? You talked about being a singer. I mean, what are your career goals? Where do you want to see yourself in 20 years?
Yeah, I still sing. I sing the national anthem. That's pretty much the only chance I get to sing. I was at, other than wrestling when I was at BSU, the other part of my life took the driver's seat, and that was choir and drama. I was in a lot of choir. I sang in a couple operas. I had 5 years of classical voice training. That's a whole different story, but that's something I will be able to continue to do, is sing at events, the national anthem. So that's what I have in plan for that. But for wrestling, I'm here at St. Cloud State doing another master's, believe it or not. I worked at a bank for 3 years, and I stayed in St. Cloud because I wanted to stay with the wrestling team. But now that I'm done at the bank, I went back for another master's, and I'm going for college counseling and student development. And one of my main goals is to work at admissions, or work in student affairs at a college atmosphere. So that would be my plan, is to do admissions for a big university, Division I, D2, what have you, and still be able to broadcast wrestling on the side. This is always going to be something that I'll do for the rest of my life. And knowing that if I'm not able to broadcast a team every year, I know that I will set my vacation time aside for the Division I national championships every year. But I'd love to do it year round. I would love to get as much experience as possible broadcasting the sport, along with doing something at the college that I am broadcasting at.
So you would only be applying to schools with wrestling programs, is what you're telling me.
Well, the way it works is, what I've seen is that with these regional networks that do college wrestling, that do their Pac-12, the Big Ten, ESPN3, if I'm within the vicinity of those colleges, I think that possibly could be an opportunity for me to just get get a hold of those nearby universities, letting them know that I'm here to be your broadcaster. If I get a job at D2, I know that they would be happy to put a mic in front of me because that's what Steve did. I know financially it might not be something that is possibility, but to me, that's why I want a 40-hour job working at that college. I mean, to me, it's not about money doing that. I love wrestling. That's my me time. It's my me time broadcasting the sport of wrestling. So if I'm within the vicinity of a hotbed of big-time schools, that would be ideal.
What's been your favorite moment in wrestling since you got started at St. Cloud State?
It's got to be up there. One of my best moments I've actually had at the Division I level is I had Yanni Diakomahalis and Dean Heil at my mat this year, and that was fun.
Oh, goody.
Come on, that was a fun one. That's got to be up there. Louis Hayes and Sean Fouts was another one, rematch at ACC final, and within 20 seconds, I was broadcasting that match and thought that Louis Hayes has to try something here. He has to try a cement mixer or something. And believe it or not, he did it. And he threw it, and then he tied it up and beat Fouts in OT. So matches like that. But if I were to think of something that's a big-time moment, my time at St. Cloud State, it had to be the time that Larry Bomstead shocked the world in Maryville. And if people are listening that have heard that YouTube video, have heard my broadcast, know exactly what I'm talking about. It was in St. Louis. It was the first day of the national tournament, and Larry Bomstead was a true freshman. As people know who Larry Bomstead is from ACGC, he was in the blood round. You win, you're into the next day. You lose, you're done. We had 6 guys in the national tournament that year, and Larry's just pinning everyone. But the guy he's got is Keenan Haggerty from Maryville, a guy that he actually got pinned by in the semis at the regional tournaments the couple weeks prior. So we're thinking like, oh, this is it. I mean, we're getting close here. And Bomstead gets tossed to his back, but he gets off his back and gets a chance to get up. And he gets in the top position, puts the legs in, uses his strength, uses his flexibility, and throws in a crossface cradle with the legs in, cradles Keenan Haggerty and pins him. And in front of everybody, a whole side of those stands were Maryville fans, the whole side of it. And it was just quiet, and I'm just going ballistic on Media Row. And that will be forever one of the times that I knew that I lost my voice and was kind of scared of how am I going to have a voice for the next day. But most importantly, it was joy knowing that, oh, my goodness, Larry Bomstead just did something amazing.
Yeah, you get caught up in those situations, and being part of a team, that's one thing. And then, of course, you're not part of a team at the NCAA championships. You're part of a broadcast team, but you get to see those moments unfold. And when I go back home and I watch ye old alma mater, whether it be my high school or my college team compete, and you're not working, you kind of step back, you be a fan a little bit. How hard is it to know that you are a broadcaster for a specific team, and there are levels of decorum you have to keep on Media Row, but I mean, what are those struggles, those hurdles that you feel like, okay, I got to calm down here. I'm going to get thrown out.
Yeah. I know that I have the opportunity to broadcast a very good team, and I've had the opportunity to get to know all these guys on a great level. All these guys have got to be brothers of mine, and I've got to be attached to them. And I know that I've got to settle down at times, that you're not going to win all of them, and it's tough to keep the broadcast going when you're that emotionally invested. But knowing that, hey, it's just another match. There's been times that I'm bent out of shape about the result, but when I leave and I actually talk to the parents afterwards, they're not bent out of shape about it. It's just another match. Well, we will get it next time. So I've learned from the parents and learned to just broadcast a match. You can get excited, but you can't get that emotionally invested, or your whole broadcast is just going to be bad because you're upset about one guy getting pinned. So it's just being able to stay focused, broadcasting the match of those people that are listening across the nation, and make sure you get a good product.
As we wrap up here, I just got to know, as a Minnesota native, what is the best food Minnesota has to offer? I just completely off topic. I just want to talk food for a minute.
Well, if you want Minnesota specific, I am a Lefse fan. That's where that's at with two. I'm not going to touch lutefisk with a 10-foot pole. That's for sure. My grandpa had that this past Christmas. All of us are having a Christmas meal, and he's sitting there with a big, huge lutefisk fillet and melted butter, and he's eating away. And like, no. So that's as stereotypical as you get. I'm staying away from that stuff. So if I have to look, it's probably Lefse. There's a lot of good places in the Twin Cities. I mean, the Juicy Lucy's where it's at, but it depends on where you want to look for the Juicy Lucy, because there's a couple of other places too. But for other than that, for food, I just like my normal food, pizza, burgers. There's nothing better than a small town bar burger. If you go to a small town where I'm from, 900 people, and even in Bemidji, where you go to a place where a burger is made, it's made from a local meat market, and the buns are made from a local bakery. So that's, to me, I'm biased towards small town food.
I'm with you on the small town stuff, because moving out here, as we get off topic, as we wrap up this episode of the Guillotine Grapevine, we get our meat from Foley Locker, Champion Meats up in Foley. So I'm not buying ground beef here at our local Cub Foods. I'm going up to Foley to get them. I'm getting the meat snacks. I'm getting these awesome brats that they make. So yes, Minnesota, thank you for having just the most awesome butcher shops and meat packing places and such. So I can get a good it's already thawing out. I'm waiting for the snow to melt so I can fire up the grill. Actually fired up the grill last week when it wasn't snowing. So, Minnesota, you do good in the small town bar burger. I'm with you, with places like Foley. So John Peterson, thanks for the time. And where can we hear you next? When is the next time wrestling fans are going to be like, hey, I recognize that guy?
Well, what is scheduled right now, it's going to be the next November when we go against Chadron State. The schedule's out, and we have a scheduled duel at home against Chadron State. You'll hear me on the KBSC sports stream. If you don't know where to find that, you can go to kbsc.org and click on the sports stream, and I'll be there. Bells and whistles on.
Bells and whistles with the voice of St. Cloud State Wrestling, National Wrestling Media Association Broadcaster of the Year, John Peterson. Thanks for the time, man, and congratulations again.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Support wrestling in the land of 10,000 wrestlers by subscribing to The Guillotine. 9 issues a year for just $20, the best value in Minnesota wrestling. Subscribe at theguillotine.com/subscribe.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.